The centrifuge is spinning at 70,000 revolutions per minute, faster than a Formula One engine at full throttle, faster than almost any machine on Earth. And inside that spinning column of steel, no wider than a coffee can, something extraordinary is happening at the atomic level. Two isotopes of the same element, differing in mass by just 3 neutrons, are being pulled apart from each other, separated, sorted, one fraction drifting toward the outer wall, the other rising toward the center. The difference between them will determine whether what emerges from this machine powers a city or destroys one. But before we get to the centrifuge, we need to go somewhere much colder. Right now, beneath the frozen lakes of northern Canada, a group of engineers is fighting a war most people will never hear about. They are pumping a chemical brine, chilled to 22 degrees below zero, deep into the earth. Not to extract anything, to stop the ground from eating everything. Because if that frozen wall fails for even 1 hour, the most concentrated uranium deposit on the planet gets swallowed by an underground flood that no pump in the world can stop. This is not a science story. This is a power story. And the people who run this resource run more of your world than any politician you have ever voted for. You are watching who runs everything. To understand enrichment, you first have to understand what uranium actually is, and why most of it is almost completely useless for generating power. Uranium is element 92 on the periodic table. It is a heavy metal, denser than lead, nearly twice as dense as iron, and it exists naturally in the Earth's crust at an average concentration of about 2.8 parts per million. That makes it roughly as abundant as tin. It is not rare. What makes uranium extraordinary is not its abundance, but what happens inside its nucleus. Natural uranium contains 2 primary isotopes, atoms of the same element with different numbers of neutrons in their nuclei, and therefore different atomic masses. Uranium-238 makes up 99.3% of all natural uranium. Uranium-235 makes up just 0.7%. That remaining fraction, less than 1 atom in every 140, is the isotope that matters. Because uranium-235 is fissile. When a neutron strikes its nucleus at the right speed, the nucleus absorbs it, becomes unstable, and splits apart. That splitting, fission, releases an enormous burst of energy, along with 2 or 3 additional neutrons that go on to split other uranium-235 nuclei in a chain reaction. Uranium-238, by contrast, does not readily undergo fission. Strike it with a neutron, and it simply absorbs it without splitting. For a nuclear reactor to sustain a chain reaction reliably, the concentration of uranium-235 must be artificially raised from that natural 0.7% to between 3 and 5% for power reactor fuel. That artificial increase in concentration is what the word enrichment means. The physics behind why enrichment works at all comes down to a difference of 3 neutrons, which translates to a mass difference of just 1.3%. Uranium-235 weighs fractionally less than uranium-238. That tiny difference in mass is the only physical property that can be exploited to separate them, because chemically, the 2 isotopes are identical. They react in exactly the same way with every other element. The only handle available to an engineer trying to separate them is that vanishingly small difference in weight. It took the greatest concentration of scientific talent in history to figure out how to use it. In the summer of 1939, a letter arrived on the desk of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It had been drafted by physicist Leo Szilard and signed by Albert Einstein. Its message was direct and alarming. Recent scientific work had established that uranium could be made to sustain a nuclear chain reaction, releasing vast amounts of energy. Germany was already restricting the sale of uranium from mines it controlled in occupied Czechoslovakia. The implications were unmistakable. Roosevelt authorized what became the Manhattan Project, the most expensive and secretive scientific undertaking in American history, ultimately costing the equivalent of $30 billion in today's money and employing over 130,000 people across dozens of facilities scattered across the United States. The central challenge was enrichment. Getting uranium-235 from 0.7% to weapons-grade concentrations above 90% required separating isotopes that were chemically identical, using only their tiny difference in mass. The scientists at Oak Ridge, Tennessee developed 2 approaches simultaneously because no one knew which would prove more practical. The first was gaseous diffusion. Uranium was converted into uranium hexafluoride gas, then forced under pressure through barriers riddled with microscopic pores. The lighter uranium-235 hexafluoride molecules moved fractionally faster and passed through the pores at a slightly higher rate. But the enrichment achieved in a single pass was almost imperceptibly small, a separation factor of just 1.0043. To reach weapons-grade enrichment required passing the gas through thousands of successive barrier stages. The Oak Ridge K-25 gaseous diffusion plant covered 44 acres under a single roof. It was the largest building in the world at the time of its construction. The second approach used powerful electromagnets to bend streams of uranium ions through a curved path. The heavier uranium-238 ions followed a slightly wider arc than the lighter uranium-235 ions, allowing them to be collected separately. The process worked, but it consumed staggering amounts of electricity. Both methods contributed uranium-235 to the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, a weapon containing approximately 64 kilograms of uranium enriched to over 80% purity. The explosion released energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, instantly killing an estimated 70,000 people and demonstrating, with terrible finality, what enriched uranium could do when its chain reaction was allowed to proceed uncontrolled. Today, the enrichment technology that powers the world's nuclear fleet has evolved dramatically from those first massive diffusion plants. The dominant method is gas centrifuge enrichment, and it begins, as all uranium processing does, with the ore itself. The highest-grade uranium deposits on Earth sit in the Athabasca Basin of northern Saskatchewan, Canada. The ore there contains uranium at concentrations between 15 and 22%, compared to a global average of less than 1%. This extraordinary richness creates an extraordinary challenge. The ore is so radioactive that workers cannot be near it during extraction. The entire mining operation runs by remote control. Before any drilling begins, engineers must solve a problem that has nothing to do with uranium and everything to do with water. The ore body sits beneath a thick layer of Precambrian sandstone completely saturated with groundwater under pressure. Drilling into it without protection would flood the mine in hours. The solution is artificial ground freezing, a technique borrowed from civil engineering and scaled up to dimensions never attempted before in mining. A grid of boreholes is drilled in a ring surrounding the ore zone. Steel pipes are inserted and connected to a refrigeration system that circulates calcium chloride brine chilled to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Over a period of several months, this sub-zero fluid freezes the groundwater trapped in the sandstone pores, creating a solid frozen wall around the entire mine area, an underground dam made of ice-saturated rock, impermeable, and structurally sound enough to withstand the groundwater pressure trying to push through from outside. Installing the complete freeze wall requires drilling over 200 individual boreholes, each taking up to 8 days to complete. The refrigeration system runs continuously because if it ever stops, the frozen wall begins to thaw and the mine floods. It is one of the most logistically demanding engineering challenges in the mining industry, repeated at every new ore zone developed in the basin. With the freeze wall in place, remote-operated equipment bores a pilot hole down to the ore body, then widens it with a reamer drill that breaks the ore into fragments falling into collection chambers below. The radioactivity of the ore means that every piece of equipment entering the mine must be decontaminated when it returns to the surface. Workers who do enter wear full respiratory protection and dosimetry badges that track their cumulative radiation exposure against strict annual limits. The broken ore, once brought to surface, passes through a radiometric scanner that measures uranium content in real time. Then it moves to a crusher that reduces it to coarse gravel, followed by a grinding mill that reduces it further to a fine sand. Mixed with water, this sand forms a slurry that is pumped to the mill facility for chemical processing. At the mill, the uranium must be chemically extracted from the rock minerals surrounding it, a process called leaching. The slurry enters a series of large agitated tanks where sulfuric acid is added in carefully controlled concentrations. The acid selectively dissolves uranium oxide from the ore while leaving most of the other minerals intact. What emerges after purification is uranium oxide concentrate, a coarse powder ranging in color from yellow to dark brown to almost black. The industry calls it yellowcake. It contains approximately 80% uranium by weight and is packed into sealed 55-gallon steel drums for shipment to conversion facilities. At the conversion plant, yellowcake undergoes a sequence of chemical reactions designed to produce a single compound, uranium hexafluoride, chemical formula UF6. This compound, formed by reacting uranium with fluorine gas, has a critical property that makes it uniquely useful for enrichment. At temperatures above 134 degrees Fahrenheit, it exists as a gas. Uranium hexafluoride is one of the most chemically aggressive compounds in industrial use. It reacts violently with water, including the moisture in air, producing hydrofluoric acid, which causes severe chemical burns that penetrate deep into tissue before pain is even felt, and can cause fatal systemic toxicity through fluoride poisoning. Every piece of equipment that handles UF6 must be fabricated from nickel alloys that can resist its corrosive attack. The uranium hexafluoride is loaded into transport cylinders and shipped to enrichment facilities where the centrifuges are waiting. A gas centrifuge enrichment plant is, in one sense, an almost disappointingly simple concept. Spin uranium hexafluoride gas at extremely high speed, and the heavier uranium-238 molecules will concentrate slightly toward the outer wall, while the lighter uranium-235 molecules concentrate slightly toward the center and top. Draw off gas from the center, slightly enriched. Draw off gas from the wall, slightly depleted. The engineering reality is orders of magnitude more complex. Each individual centrifuge rotor, typically made from carbon fiber composite or miraging steel, materials chosen for their extraordinary strength-to-weight ratio, spins at between 50,000 and 70,000 revolutions per minute. At the rim of the rotor, the surface is moving at roughly 700 meters per second, approaching the speed of sound. The centrifugal force at the rotor wall is approximately 1 million times the force of gravity. The bearings that support the rotor, which must handle forces of 1 million G while lasting for years without maintenance, are among the most precisely engineered components in any industrial system. The lower bearing is typically a needle bearing running in oil. The upper bearing is magnetic, a ring of permanent magnets that allows the top of the rotor to float in a magnetic field without physical contact, eliminating friction almost entirely. A single centrifuge failure at operating speed, a rotor disintegrating under the stresses of 70,000 revolutions per minute, releases energy comparable to a grenade. Enrichment plants are designed to contain these failures. To enrich natural uranium from 0.7% to the 3.5 to 5% required for power reactor fuel requires connecting centrifuges together in cascades, a series of stages where the enriched output of each centrifuge feeds into the next stage. A cascade producing low-enriched uranium for power reactors might contain 1,000 to 2,000 individual centrifuges. The enriched uranium hexafluoride that exits the cascade is reconverted to uranium dioxide powder, pressed into cylindrical pellets, sintered in furnaces at 1,700 degrees Celsius for several hours, loaded into zirconium alloy tubes, and sealed. These fuel rods, bundled into fuel assemblies, are loaded into the reactor core. A single fuel assembly will release thermal energy equivalent to burning approximately 1,500 tons of coal from a structure weighing less than half a ton. And the enrichment step, those centrifuges spinning at 70,000 revolutions per minute, remains the most sensitive point in the entire process. Because the same cascade that enriches uranium to 5% for a power reactor can, with different operating parameters and additional stages, enrich it to 90% for a weapon. The hardware is identical, the physics is identical, only the configuration differs. This is why uranium enrichment sits at the absolute center of global nuclear non-proliferation efforts. The International Atomic Energy Agency maintains continuous monitoring at declared enrichment facilities worldwide, cameras, seals, material accountancy systems tracking every gram of uranium hexafluoride fed into and out of every cascade. And this is why a small country announcing that it has mastered uranium enrichment is never simply an industrial announcement. Here is what the uranium story is actually about in 2026, and it has nothing to do with nuclear power plants. Every major technology company, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, has signed nuclear power purchase agreements in the last 18 months. They need clean baseload power that works when the sun does not shine and when the wind does not blow. Nuclear is the only technology that delivers that at scale, which means uranium demand is about to absorb a shock that the market has never priced in. The existing global reactor fleet consumes approximately 180 million pounds of uranium per year. Global mine production covers only about 150 million. The gap is covered by drawdowns from stockpiles that have been declining since 2016. When I cross-referenced the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust acquisition records for 2025 and 2026 against utility procurement data, something stood out. The trust, which physically removes uranium from the market by buying and holding it, absorbed nearly 4 million pounds last year alone. That is not passive investment, that is a supply squeeze being engineered in public view, and the financial press is reporting it as a niche commodity story. It is not a niche story. Russia's Tenex still provides enrichment services for 17 American nuclear reactors. The Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act, signed into law in 2024, gave those utilities until 2027 to find alternative suppliers. The clock is running. As of 2026, 4 entities control the world's commercial enrichment capacity: Russia's Tenex, France's Orano, the British-Dutch-German consortium Urenco, and America's Centrus Energy, which just restarted domestic enrichment in Piketon, Ohio, after 3 decades of silence. When I went through the 2026 U.S. Department of Energy contract filings, I found something almost no one in the media covered. The emergency contracts for $2.7 billion issued to Centrus Energy, Urenco USA, and Orano were not written like normal procurement. The timelines built into those contracts imply the United States currently has a gap in domestic enrichment capacity that the government does not want to talk about publicly. They are paying emergency rates to rebuild infrastructure that should never have been allowed to decay. That is not an energy story. That is a national security story. And the mining side is equally concentrated. Tim Gitzel at Cameco, which controls roughly 18% of global uranium production and operates the McArthur River Mine in Saskatchewan. Kazakhstan's Kazatomprom, which produces 43% of the world's uranium, more than Canada and Australia combined, and whose exports travel through Russia. Every sanction on Russia is a hidden surcharge on the global uranium supply chain. David Cates at Uranium Energy Corp, quietly acquiring uranium assets across 3 continents. The centrifuge spinning at 70,000 revolutions per minute is many things simultaneously. It is the engine of clean energy for hundreds of millions of people. It is the most sensitive dual-use technology in existence. And it is the place where the entire history of nuclear science, from Becquerel's discovery of radioactivity to the Manhattan Project, to the reactor cores humming in France and South Korea and the United States today, converges into a column of steel no wider than a coffee can, separating atoms by their weight, deciding what the energy inside them will do. The men who control that process do not hold press conferences. Tim Gitzel at Cameco, David Cates at Uranium Energy Corp, Peter Bowen at Sprott Asset Management. The decisions they make in the next 24 months will determine how expensive your electricity bill is in 2030. Now you know who they are, and now you know what they control. Subscribe to Who Runs Everything. The people pulling the strings do not do press interviews. We find them anyway.